stream. I think it's okay, but we'll just start. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvina Vadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Very good. Welcome back, and welcome to the students attending this satsang online. We have a lot of great questions again. Apologize in advance if I don't get to your question. There's more than we can answer. And as always, we'll alternate between questions coming from our online students and questions from our local students. Why do I have that up there? Get rid of that. Oh, sorry, that was left over from the last class. We don't need that. Okay. So this question actually just came a few moments ago from Diego, who lives in Mexico. And Diego asks, in the last two, he's apparently watching the classes on Upadesha Sastri. And the last two classes we were talking about Shankara's refutation of Buddhism. And one of the main points of that refutation is that Buddha rejected the authority of the Vedic scriptures. Having rejected the Vedic scriptures, then he was only left with reasoning and experience. Remember, in Vedanta, we talk about shruti, scripture, yukti, reasoning, and anubhava, experience, as the three bases upon which truth is established. If all three of these don't exist, we don't accept it as being true. And the metaphor I've given many times is like a three-legged table. It's quite stable. You take one of those three legs together, and the table falls over. Buddhism has taken one of the three legs away, the leg of scripture, shruti, because Buddha did not accept the validity of the Vedas. And the question now is he says that I mentioned that Buddhists use only human thought as a means of understanding. Means reasoning. Human thought means reasoning. And anubhava, their own experience. And now his question, Diego's question is, isn't it true that shruti, scripture, is also considered a kind of human thought? After all, scriptures came from human beings. The Hindu scriptures came from rishis. Christian scriptures came from prophets. Quran came from Muhammad. So there's a human being involved in each of these scriptures. Well, technically, there are absolutely human beings are involved, but the very fact that we call them scriptures puts them in a different category, right? We don't call them just books, in spite of the fact that Bible means what? Bible is a Latin word for book. That's just what it means. But it's more than a book. For Christians, it's much more than a book. For Muslims, Quran is more than a set of surahs, chapters. And for Hindus, the Vedas are more than a compilation of interesting observations of these ancient rishis. So in every case, scriptures, that which is called a scripture, is something which is said to have more than human authority, divine authority. Now, we're not going to get into the discussion, do they all have the same authenticity? If the Bible is divinely revealed, do the contents of the Bible reveal divine revelation? Do the contents of the Quran reveal divine revelation? Do the contents of the Vedas reveal the fact that they were divinely revealed? I don't want to get into anything comparative here. That's not our purpose. What we do know is that the rishis were able to discover something that you and I probably couldn't. They were endowed with a unique capacity for understanding. A common expression to describe those rishis is kranta darshi, those who could see beyond. In fact, rish, the root means to see. In fact, old-fashioned texts will call them seers, but seers in the sense that they could see what you and I can't see. They could discover what you and I couldn't discover. So what we would say then is, even though the Vedas are the rishis are the ones who composed the verses of the Vedas. Those verses were at first only in oral form. They weren't written down until long after the rishis revealed them. But what we would say is that the Vedas were not composed by the rishis. We would say that the Vedas are revealed by the rishis. The technical term used is aparusheya. They are not the product of human minds. Divinely inspired, divinely revealed. And just to circle back a little bit before we continue, if you ask, well, how can we be so sure? And the only test is the content. And at least for me, my entire adult life has been focused on these scriptures, and I continue to find them absolutely remarkable. So I think the real test of the validity of a scripture is less its origin and more its content. So you can argue about the origin of the Vedas. You can argue, and people do argue a lot, about the origin of the Bible and Quran. What's the point? Really speaking, what do you get out of those? Those are academic arguments which don't help a practitioner at all. What helps a practitioner is not the origin of a scripture, but rather the content of the scripture. And the content of the Vedas in general and the Upanishads in particular, the content is remarkable. Okay, next question from Amit, who lives in India. He says, is Atma and Brahman the same? Yes. But then, if they're one and the same, why do we use different names? Why don't we just say, Brahman is within you? Why don't we just say, Atma is a reality because of which everything exists? Why do we use these different words? Because Vedanta is a methodology, which is something we've talked about here many times. Vedanta is not a collection of statements of fact. If it were so, then we could, if in mathematics you can reduce expressions. Did you ever do that as a algebra student? You have an assignment, reduce these expressions. So Brahman and Atman could mathematically be reduced to one reality. But this is not mathematics. This is a step-by-step guide to a process of self-inquiry, and at each step, different ideas, concepts, and words are introduced. So Atma is introduced in a particular way, Brahman is introduced in a different way, and not until the very end of that methodology do Brahman and Atma are found to be identical. So if you look at Vedanta as a philosophy book or mathematics book, that's completely the wrong perspective. Yes, Atma and Brahman are the same, but that's not how Vedanta works. It's a step-by-step methodology. Okay, take one more question here. I understand, this is a question from Arun, who lives in Bangalore. Arun asks, I understand Ishvara to be Brahman conditioned by Maya. This is our Vedantic way of describing Ishvara. Though both, I have to understand, yeah, but both, how can they belong to different orders of reality? This is a really common confusion between Ishvara and Brahman. I think the next question also. Yeah, Crystal, who lives in Baltimore, asks almost the same question. My question is about Brahman and his powers or attributes to allow creation to occur, Maya. I'd like to understand more about the Shakti that comes out of nirguna Brahman as saguna Brahman, taught by it. There's a lot of fancy words are used here, and I think we get hung up with these words: saguna Brahman, nirguna Brahman, Ishvara, Maya. One very practical suggestion is, if the meaning of each of these words is not crystal clear to you, long ago I created a series of videos, just 6 videos, called Introduction to Vedanta. Please watch those videos. I mean, without the fun, many of our questions and topics that we take up in Satsang in our classes, they're more advanced topics. And obviously, if you don't have the basics clearly, you're going to struggle with those advanced topics. So the first practical advice would be, if these terms are not clear, the relationship between Ishvara and Brahman, what is saguna Brahman, what is nirguna Brahman, if these terms are not crystal clear, and they should be, they're not hard to understand, but it would take me an hour to do so right now, and we don't want to do that. So please watch those videos, Introduction to Vedanta. But just to give you at least something to hold on to, we say Brahman is this underlying reality because of which everything exists, including Ishvara. That's not so complicated. Everything exists because of Brahman. Everything includes you, me, the world, and Ishvara. So Brahman is the underlying reality because of which even Ishvara exists. Okay, we'll take some questions here. We'll need the microphone. Yeah, and we'll take this question first.
So you know how you said anything gained can be lost? So when you gain knowledge, why can't, of your true self, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why can't that be lost? And also, actually, first we'll go with that one. Yeah.
Okay, so anything gained can be lost. And this is our discussion about moksha that we had in the prior class. And the discussion, and for the benefit of our online students, if moksha is gained, it can be lost. Anything gained, and I gave the example of wealth. You can gain a lot of wealth in this lifetime. No matter how much wealth you gain, there will be one day where you lose it all, and that's the day you die. So anything gained can be lost. If moksha is something gained, it can indeed be lost. So then the question is, what about knowledge? So if you have this thought, I am Brahman, I am Brahman, I am Brahman, can that thought be lost? Tell me, do you think an enlightened person goes on thinking all day long, I am Brahman, I am Brahman, I am Brahman? Get up in the morning, I am Brahman, I am Brahman. Brushing teeth, I am Brahman, I am Brahman. No, it doesn't work like that. That thought goes. But that thought previously destroyed ignorance. The ignorance, that so-called veil of ignorance covering your true nature as Satchidananda Atma, was destroyed by that thought, I am Brahman. And that which is destroyed doesn't generally come back. That's, that which anything destroyed, if I break this pot, you know something is what they call law of entropy. If I break this pot, can you turn back time and put it back together? It's not going to come back together. When it's broken, it's broken, and it stays broken. So when ignorance is removed, it's over, it's done. So it's not a matter of gaining something and then losing something. Moksha, from the standpoint of Advaita Vedanta, moksha is the removal of ignorance that prevents you from recognizing your true divine nature. So we can say, in other words, and nice connection to the earlier class, Vedanta doesn't give you anything. Moksha doesn't give you anything. If your true nature is already divine, you don't need anything more. What Vedanta does is take something away from you. It takes something away that causes a lot of suffering. Vedanta removes ignorance, the ignorance that's the root cause for suffering, and when that ignorance is removed, we call that moksha. Okay? A question over here? Please take the microphone.
Thank you. Swamiji, my question has to do with the role of faith in Vedanta. Specifically, when you say Sat Chit Ananda, Sat, I can understand consciousness existing because you and I and everybody here is conscious, it exists, and there's empirical ways to test for that. Chit, by definition, it's consciousness. Okay, once you start attributing the concept of limitlessness, eternal, is that a matter of faith?
Absolutely not. It's a matter of self-discovery, discovering who you truly are. Let's make this point clear. Faith, does heaven exist or not? But isn't it a nice American? I've noticed no one in India does that, only Americans. Well, I don't know. Very American kind of expression. I've never seen anyone in India do that. And they must make fun of us Americans for doing that. So, does heaven exist or not? We have no way of knowing. Do I exist or not? Let me ask a more interesting question. Do you believe in heaven? Maybe, maybe not. Do you believe that I'm sitting here?
You're sitting
Well,
there.
belief is not the right word.
No.
You see, the realm of belief is that which is remote, that which you can't experience, that which you cannot directly know. That which you cannot know directly becomes a matter of belief. The whole doctrine of reincarnation. It's all a matter of belief because we can't analyze it, we can't observe it, we can't know it directly. So it becomes a matter of belief. The difference now with regard to Atma is present in your experience right now as consciousness. Atma is not remote in any sense of the word. Therefore, Atma is not a matter of belief. And just, you say Sat and Chit. Do you believe you exist? Sat means existence.
Correct.
Not a matter of belief. Do you believe you're conscious? Not a matter of belief. Consciousness is a fact of your experience right this morning, right this moment. With regard to Satchidananda being identical to Brahman, this all has to be understood and discovered. It's a process of personal self-inquiry leading you to discover a truth about an already present, already not remote, and immediately present reality, you. which is obscured by that so-called veil of ignorance. Vedanta removes that so-called veil of ignorance, and you discover who you truly are, which is a discovery. It's knowledge, because it's not remote. If it's remote, it could be faith. Atma is not remote, can't be a matter of faith.
Thank you very much.
Good. One more question here. Raise your hand.
Hi, Swamiji. Thank you very much for everything. Quick question about you were talking about the effort, and that the outcome of the action is dependent on how much effort you're putting into it, correct? So, and to remove the veil, I wasn't familiar with all the terms that we were talking about today, but I looked it up. I come from a little bit of a different stream. It's my first time here. But
Welcome.
moksha, which is enlightenment, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
It takes enormous amounts of effort to remove the veils of ignorance, correct?
Why?
We are all trying to do that and not succeeding. I mean, we are maybe getting somewhere, but it's not that easy to just wake up in the morning and say, I'm enlightenment and free, correct? It takes a lot of meditation, it
How
takes
hard-
practice, it takes learning, it takes coming to these satsangs, it takes driving all the way over here to do that. So I know it's part of our nature.
How difficult is it to see me sitting here?
Easy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because you're looking in the right direction.
Correct.
So you describe gaining enlightenment as being very difficult, perhaps because, and this is true not just of you, it's true for most people, looking in the wrong direction.
Correct.
If you're looking in the right direction, it's not difficult. If you're looking in the wrong direction, it's impossible, not just difficult, it's impossible. And that shows why there's so much focus on scripture and teacher, with shruti and guru. A lot of importance is assigned because on our own, we won't know where to look. We need guidance. And to the extent you have proper guidance, it's not that hard. To the extent that you don't have proper guidance, it will be more difficult. But go ahead and follow up on this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you if you have proper guidance, but we're still, right, because all of us are stuck with our own mind that is just doing what it's doing. In order to, even with proper guidance, which, you know, from where I come from, it's called like pointing out instructions, as long as your mind is stuck in the veils of ignorance, then just saying the proper guidance is not going to ultimately transform the mind. You have to meditate, you have to practice, you have to read, get wisdom, and ultimately your mind slowly will transform, and then it will be free, right?
There's some of what you said is supported by teachings of Advaita Vedanta, but not all of it. There is some effort involved, and you correctly said it's effort in preparing the mind. How difficult is it? And we can, let me make this point very clear. Without, you say how difficult, you ask how difficult is it to gain enlightenment? And once again, we can say, if your mind is completely prepared, it's easy. If your mind is completely prepared and you have proper guidance, it's as easy as seeing me. If your mind is completely prepared and you're looking in the right direction, it's effortless. But to make your mind completely prepared requires effort. And even to spend some time with the guru and scriptures and understand, that will also take some effort. So there is effort involved. But the culmination of that effort is not merely a transformation of the mind. And that term stuck out. And here's the problem. The mind is constantly being improved in one's spiritual practice. There's a long process of improving the mind. The mind, as you use the word, transformed. But I think you suggested when the mind is completely transformed, then enlightenment takes place. And there's a problem here. Because if you go on improving your mind, when will that mind reach a state of perfection? And here's the problem. The mind cannot reach a state of perfection. The mind will never be perfected. An enlightened person does not have a perfect mind. An enlightened person is perfectly free from ignorance, but does not have a perfect mind. So we would, to say that the mind has to go through this arduous process of transformation, and you didn't use the words, but I will supply the words, if the mind has to reach some extreme condition of perfection, that's extraordinarily difficult and perhaps impossible. So, Shankaracharya, in the tradition of Advaita Vedanta, says the mind must be sufficiently prepared to undergo this process of self-inquiry, guided by the Guru and scriptures. And that sufficiently prepared mind can manage. Last part, how much effort does it take to get a sufficiently prepared mind? Depends on your starting point. If you're already pretty mature, then it's less work. But if you are, I by the way, I consider myself a remedial student. So did you ever have to take remedial courses in college? You're not even ready, so go and take these courses first. Get ready. So I had to do a lot of remedial work for mind to get prepared. So it depends on your starting point, but it's not an extraordinary level of effort. And let me just add one thing. This is not part of your question. Nor do you have to be extraordinarily intelligent. Some people have this concept that, oh, this Vedanta is so sophisticated and all this philosophy, and oh, I'm not smart enough for all of it. It's ironic. The smarter you are, you know where this is going. Absolutely. The smarter you are, the more difficult it becomes, because you end up having more doubts, more questions. What about this? What about that? What about that? And that goes on for years. So sheer intelligence is not necessary and could even be an obstacle. So, but a reasonable amount of effort for a prepared mind, then guided by scripture and guru, process of self-inquiry. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much.
Good, excellent. Let me take a few more questions online. This is Krishna who lives someplace. And his question is rather long and refers to several Bhagavad Gita verses. But his general thing is according to the most famous translation, this is a big paraphrase of Krishna's question. If you read the most famous translation of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the most famous translation of the Bhagavad Gita? As it is. Okay? Authored by Srila Prabhupada, very pious Vaishnava teacher. But as a very pious Vaishnava teacher, he puts his very Vaishnava twist on everything he teaches. Just as when I teach Bhagavad Gita, I'll definitely put an Advaita twist on it. Absolutely. Every teacher will interpret a scripture according to their own background. How can it be otherwise? So, if you attend my classes on the Bhagavad Gita, you'll get an Advaita Vedanta perspective on the Bhagavad Gita. If you read Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is, you get a Vaishnava version of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, if you say which is right and which is wrong, how can you say one is right and one is wrong? There are different perspectives. If you say which is more effective in reaching moksha, that's a different matter. Because, anyway, I won't get into that further. That's a completely different matter. Which is more effective? So, in Prabhupada's translation of the Bhagavad Gita, there are several passages which say that Sri Krishna is superior to impersonal Brahman. Now, how shall we interpret that? Prabhupada said that Brahman, the absolute reality because of which everything exists, is here, and Sri Krishna, the supreme personality of the Godhead, his terms, is above that. Above in what sense? And honestly, why call him wrong? I mean, definitely from a pure Advaita Vedanta perspective, he's got it backwards, and Brahman is the absolute reality. Ishvara is a lower reality. Brahman is called Paramartha Satta, absolute reality. Ishvara is as real as the world, as real as you and me. Vyavaharika Satta, not illusion, as the ISKCON people like to say. We don't say the world is illusion. We don't say the Ishvara is illusory. We do say less real than Brahman. So if that being the Vedantic perspective, Brahman is the absolute reality, and Ishvara and the world and all of us are less real, then how to understand Prabhupada's statement that the supreme personality of the Godhead is above Brahman? From his perspective, it's absolutely correct. If I were raised in a pious Bengali Vaishnava family, I might teach the same thing. It's above, not from, I don't know what's a simple way. I'm about to use the word ontological, which is one of the ugliest words to use. From the status of existence itself, the statement is wrong. And that's, as I just explained, these two levels of reality, which Shankara teaches so brilliantly. But Prabhupada was teaching, and something that's so easy to forget, Prabhupada was a Vaishnava teacher teaching Vaishnavas, meaning that he's going to present these teachings in a way that's helpful for his students. And for his students, and for this is his Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. It's attributed mostly to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, 500 some years ago, I forget. So that's the origin of that tradition, which is a highly devotional tradition. Tremendous emphasis on bhakti. You can't pray to nirguna Brahman. No way. You can pray to the supreme personality of the Godhead, which is Prabhupada's name for Sri Krishna. And fine, if you, what is the purpose to say, oh, but that's saguna Brahman, blah, 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 blah. Understand the intent of the teacher. The teacher was teaching something helpful for his students at that point in time. So, for students who are on a devotional path, the emphasis will definitely be on what a Vedantin would call saguna Brahman, Ishvara. God with form, God with attributes, God with powers. Even though Advaita Vedanta may say there's a higher reality, that is not helpful for students on a devotional path. So if it's not helpful, don't shove it down their throats, as some Vedantins try to do. The arguments go on. Anyway, we had a nice discussion yesterday about arguments. This is a question from Sarah. I don't know where she lives, but Sarah has lost her mother. We're sorry for her loss. And she asks, is it possible for after 13 days, is it possible for her soul to be going around on this earthly plane and talking to me? So in her dreams, Mother comes. Hardly surprising that Mother would come in your dreams. Doesn't necessarily mean Mother is actually present. We know that. Our minds are capable of creating anything in our dreams, but nor is that a proof that Mother is not around. We believe that after 11 days or 13 days, by that time, that the subtle body has not only detached, but has taken another life. We believe that. We have no way of proving it. We have no way of disproving it. This is a belief that's part of the doctrine of karma. So based on the doctrine of karma, it's unlikely that Mother is still around in any kind of subtle form. Another question from Gopal Krishna, who lives in Punjab. According to the doctrine of karma, we do for our good deeds, we get good results. For our harmful deeds, we get undesirable results. Which means free will. We can choose to do good deeds, we can choose to do harmful deeds. But in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna didn't want to fight, and then Sri Krishna, in chapter 11, Sri Krishna revealed his Vishvarupa, his cosmic form, and during that, I just put some words in Gopal's mouth. During the revelation of Krishna's divine form, Sri Krishna gave Arjuna a sneak preview of what is going to happen on a battlefield. Sri Krishna witnessed all the great warriors on the battlefield dying. And the symbolism he used is they were all being drawn into these flaming mouths of this cosmic form and being devoured. Of course, devouring means time. Time devours all. And in this case, Arjuna was given like a sneak preview of the future. But the question now is, and here's where Gopal makes a mistake, that Krishna told Arjuna that your script is already written. When script is already written means predestination, right? That's what I believe Gopal is implying here. Your script is already written. Arjuna is already predestined to fight the war. And that's why in that Vishvarupa, Arjuna witnessed himself on the battlefield, not dying, but engaged in battle. Now, Gopal interprets this to support a doctrine of predestination, and that's not correct. It's a little tricky. When Sri Krishna revealed the future, Sri Krishna revealed that Arjuna would make a decision to stay on the battlefield and fight. So Arjuna did make a decision. The decision had not yet been made before the battle. So Arjuna would make that decision at the end of the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna makes his decision, says, okay, I'll go ahead and fight. Finally, in the 18th chapter, Arjuna makes that decision. But here in 11th chapter, Arjuna had not yet made that decision. So when Sri Krishna revealed the cosmic form and gave Arjuna that sneak preview into the future, that's not evidence of predetermination or predestination. It simply is a sneak preview that at some point in the future, Arjuna will decide to fight the battle. So, not predestined. One more question here from Ritik, who lives in Himachal Pradesh. When Ishvara gave us Vedanta through the rishis, wasn't it a bit unfair to people from other countries other than ancient India that they didn't have access to this great wisdom? Isn't it unfair? This idea of fairness is a little narrow. It's a very human kind of concept. I suppose, had those ancient rishis lived in the Middle East, wouldn't that have been unfair to India? Or if those ancient rishis lived in Europe, then what? It's, this concept of fairness doesn't seem to apply very nicely here. Okay, shall we take other questions here? Raise your hands if you have a question. Otherwise, we'll take a few more here. Question from Sheila, who lives in Bangalore, also from Bangalore. What is the meaning of the word sankalpa, mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, verse 2? One thing I like about her question is she doesn't simply ask, what is the meaning of sankalpa? Look it up in the dictionary. There'll be a dozen meanings. So every word derives its meaning from context. You've heard me give the example of the English word B-O-W. What is its meaning? Is it an act of reverence? Is it the front part of a boat? Is it an ornament you put on a gift? Is it what you use for arrows? Is it the sound your dog makes? You get my point. So anyway, the context is here in Bhagavad Gita. Just half a line I'll just quote just to get the context. And the line is, Nahi asanyasta sankalpaha yogi bhavati kaschana. Na kaschana yogi bhavati. No one becomes a yogi in the sense of a master of one's own mind. No one becomes who is asanyasta sankalpaha, one who has not renounced sankalpa. So the meaning is completely contextual, and it simply means desire. In that list of 12 definitions, desire is probably towards the bottom. But in this particular context, sankalpa means desire. What other things sankalpa mean? Any thought can be called a sankalpa. A thought born of the buddhi as opposed to the manas can be a sankalpa. We did some elaborate rituals yesterday. And in those rituals you do sankalpa, which is a statement of intent. So the word sankalpa has so many meanings depending on context. So here in this context, sankalpa means desire. One who has not conquered desire, asanyasta sankalpaha, one who has not renounced desires, one who has not learned to manage desires, na kaschit yogi bhavati, that person could never become a yogi. This is from Prasanna, who lives in Eluru, I think, in Andhra, I think. I looked it up. In the sandhyavandanam, prayers recited every morning and evening by many pious brahmanas, the word comes aswaditya Brahma. Ashva Asava Adityaha Brahma. The sun is Brahman. Gayatri mantra says, Tat Savitur Varenyam, which again points to the sun, and he concludes, so should we not conclude that the sun is Brahman? Brahman is sun. So we use the word Brahman in Vedanta as the ultimate reality because of which everything exists. And I think prasanna here means to imply that everything exists because of the sun. And from a scientific standpoint, that's largely true, right? If there were no sun, what would this planet be? Actually, it wouldn't exist. First of all, the very formation of this planet depended on the gravity of the sun, the formation of the solar system. And then further, no sunlight means no vegetables. No vegetables means no life. And if you somehow manage to live in spite of that, how would you stay warm since there'd be nothing to burn? Everything burnable can be traced to the sun, including coal and oil in the ground and wood and other materials above ground. Everything depends on the sun. So from a scientific standpoint, all life depends on sun. Therefore, sun is Brahman, the absolute reality because of which everything exists. That's not what's meant here. In Sandhyavandanam, this is poetry, and we have to understand the poetry right. Even in Gayatri Mantra, by the way, Gayatri Mantra, as you probably know, is not addressed to God as Gayatri. It's addressed to Savita, God as sun. But what it says, Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargaha. Tat Bhargaha. Tat Varenyam Bhargaha. That divine light, Savituhu, of the sun. Really speaking, the Gayatri Mantra is not praising the sun, it's praising the Bhargas, the light of the sun. The light of a sun is a metaphor for knowledge. Poetry. The Vedas it's all poetic, and we need to be ready to look for those poetic meanings. So it's not that the sun is Brahman, but poetically the sun can be called the source of all living things. And even in the Gayatri Mantra, it's not the sun that's really being praised, but the light of the sun, which is a metaphor for knowledge. A couple more questions. This is from Nancy, who lives in Texas. She asks, how does a sadhaka realize progress on the spiritual path? Everyone wants to know. And I smile when I say that because I still remember being a 5-year-old in the back seat of my parents' Oldsmobile. It was probably a 1950s model Oldsmobile, blue. How do I remember that nonsense? My gosh, I'm surprised. I usually don't. I have a terrible memory, and the fact that I remember this, I have no idea how. Anyway, so driving someplace in a 1956 Oldsmobile in the back seat, and asking Mom, when will we get there? Mom, when will we get there? Driving on and on and on and on. Children always ask, when will we get there? When will we get there? Natural for that 5-year-old boy to ask that question. Natural for Nancy to ask that question. But there's actually something more profound here. You don't think that Nancy is asking a 5-year-old's question. That's not the case at all. We better have some way of understanding progress on the spiritual path. Otherwise, how will you know that you're on an authentic path? How will you know for sure that you're not going the wrong direction. And you have to admit the number of wrong directions far outnumber the right directions. If you're driving your car, you can take several routes, right? If you're driving your car. But how many wrong turns could you make? Countless number of wrong turns. So the same applies in spiritual life. So how can we personally determine that we are treading a path that is leading us in the right direction towards liberation, towards moksha, towards enlightenment? There's a surprisingly simple answer to that question, in spite of the fact that the very profound the background of what is that spiritual path. But if we understand the goal of the spiritual path in a very simple, direct way, the goal of a spiritual path is to become free from suffering. Not to discover God, not to discover Brahman, not even to discover your true nature. Those are all means to an end. The ultimate goal of the spiritual path is to be free from suffering. Suppose you discover God and you still suffer. Is that enlightenment? You discover I am Satchidananda Atma and I'm miserable. What kind of enlightenment is that? You get my point. A very simple, and I would say simplistic, it's overly simple to say that the goal of spiritual life is freedom from suffering, but it's accurate. So that gives you an excellent way to judge what's happening in your own life. And that is, do you find yourself increasingly free from suffering? And I think almost all of you can say yes, because these teachings really bring about a change in the way we think, a change of worldview, a transformation of worldview in such a way that the kinds of thinking that used to make you suffer, they fade away. And in that way, you find yourself increasingly free from suffering. I think that's the best answer to Nancy's question. Okay, one more here. Here we go back to saguna Brahman and nirguna Brahman. This is from Brajesh, who lives in Singapore. And Brajesh asks, when we use terms like saguna Brahman and nirguna Brahman, which guna are we referring to? Sattva, rajas, or tamas? If all three, how can Ishvara have tamas? Saguna Brahman is Ishvara. Gunas are three, sattva, rajas, tamas. It means Ishvara has tamas, which is a really good thing. Where do you think, in terms of gunas, physical stuff is sattva, sattvika. Physical stuff is rajasa. Physical stuff is tamasa. If Ishvara didn't have tamas, you wouldn't have a physical world to live in. So it's a good thing Ishvara has tamas. But the difference between Ishvara and you is you have tamas up here. Ishvara wields Maya. Ishvara is not wielded by Maya. Maya is trigunatmaka. Maya is these three gunas. So Ishvara has these gunas at his disposal, so to speak, to create the cosmos. But Ishvara controls the gunas do not control Ishvara, which is why Ishvara can have gunas without being affected. Any other questions, Rimbo? Yeah, please. You'll need the microphone.
Hi, Swamiji. In all the years you've been teaching and all the questions you've been answering and all the people you've met, what do you think is the biggest disconnect between people understanding what it means, all like the essence of what you're teaching and all the ignorance we're fighting against?
I think there are several ways to answer your question, but in our current context, the biggest disconnect, as you say, would be not understanding the goal. What is the goal of spiritual life? To go to heaven, and then to come back? To merge into Brahman until your meditation comes to an end? What is the goal of spiritual? To understand what is nirguna Brahman, what is saguna Brahman, what is the relationship. Academic information. Useless. Absolutely useless. So the biggest disconnect, I would say, is not understanding what we're trying to reach or accomplish through spiritual life. And what we're trying to reach or accomplish is the removal of suffering. And somehow that eludes so many people. I'm surprised by people who continue to think that the goal to be sought is some kind of transformative spiritual experience. Very common misunderstanding. And the problem with a transformative spiritual experience is if it's an experience, it comes and goes. If it's transformative, it's finite in its ability to transform. So the goal cannot be a so-called mystical experience, which is something that's, gotten very popular nowadays due to one teacher in South India. Anyway, we'll leave him unnamed. Anyway, my point is, you can have any number of mystical experiences, doesn't make you enlightened. Wrong understanding of the goal. That's, I would say, the biggest misunderstanding. Let's just take one more question online and then we'll conclude. This is a question from Alan. He doesn't say where he lives. Alan asks, how can you know if enlightenment is legitimate? Now, it's doubtful what does he mean by legitimate. Hindus speak of enlightenment, but so does Buddhism. When a Hindu gets enlightened, is it the same as Buddhist enlightenment? Is it the same as Jain enlightenment? And it goes back to your question, how do we define the goal? And to be honest, there's some difference in the definitions of the goal. Even in the Vedas, the early part of the Vedas, the so-called karma kanda of the Vedas, the goal is going to heaven. The majority of the Vedas are focused on helping you do the right rituals and live the right lifestyle so you can go to heaven. That is the goal for certain followers of the Vedas. That's not the goal for Buddhists. That's not the goal for Jains. That's not the goal for Vedantins. They actually define the goals very differently. What is the goal for Jains? What is it for a Jain to be an arhat, an enlightened saint? For that Jain, it's to be completely free from karma. So you are never reborn again. That's not the Vedantic definition of enlightenment, nor is it the... In Buddhism, it's more complicated. There are several schools of Buddhism, some of which look very similar to Advaita Vedanta, others which are not so similar to Vedanta. So the answer to Alan's question, how do I know if enlightenment is legitimate? Legitimacy depends on how you define enlightenment. In Advaita Vedanta, we define enlightenment as we just discussed, freedom from suffering. And freedom from suffering in this lifetime and in any possible future lifetimes. So if you're free from suffering in this lifetime, and then you get born into some hellish condition, that's not very helpful. So it's freedom from suffering in this lifetime, and then freedom from rebirth after this lifetime. This is our definition of enlightenment. And how do you know if it's legitimate? The second part, you have no way of knowing. How do you know you won't be reborn? I can't prove it to you, but you can't disprove it either. You can't prove it, you can't disprove it. It is revealed in Scripture. So of our three, shruti, yukti, anubhava, it's freedom from rebirth is revealed in Scripture. Yukti, you can argue for it, you can argue against it, freedom from rebirth. And anubhava, useless. You can't die and come back and tell us, oh, it's like this or like that. Okay. So we don't know. According to Advaita Vedanta, enlightenment results in freedom from rebirth. Could be, there's no way of knowing for sure. One thing we know for sure is if you're free from suffering or not. You know that every single day. And then every day you can ask yourself the question, am I going towards a direction of being increasingly free from suffering? Or am I going in a direction which will lead to increasing my suffering? And if your life is driven by that discernment, if you stay on the path of going towards less suffering, the path of Vedanta, basically, then you will find in your life that you suffer less and less. How quickly, how slowly that takes place, there's no single answer. We're all so different. But the one thing you know, day to day, no one has any doubt, am I suffering more today than yesterday, or am I suffering less? You're the only one who knows it, but you know it. And there's no doubt whatsoever. So this would determine the legitimacy. Okay, good place to conclude. Thank you for coming. We'll end with the prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat. See you next time.